When the creature's neck broke the surface of the Likouala River on the morning of April 6, 1913, Lieutenant Herman Ritter stopped breathing. For perhaps 5 seconds, his mind simply refused to process what his eyes were reporting, because rising from the dark water impossibly was a neck, not a tree trunk, not a floating log, a neck. Thick as a man's torso, covered in grey-brown skin that glistened with water and mud, extending upward in a graceful curve that reached 15 feet above the river's surface, before terminating in a head that belonged in a museum's fossil hall, not in the living Congo jungle. The head was small relative to the neck, perhaps the size of a horse's skull, with a broad, blunt snout and eyes positioned on the sides like a reptile. As Ritter watched, paralyzed by impossibility, the creature's jaw opened, and it stripped leaves from an overhanging branch with movements that were casual, unhurried, utterly unconcerned with the 2 canoes of German explorers frozen in shock 30 meters downstream. Behind the neck, the water roiled. Something massive was submerged there, something that displaced enough water to create waves that rocked the canoes. The creature's body, whatever unimaginable bulk remained hidden beneath the Likouala's murky surface, was larger than anything that should exist outside the age of dinosaurs. Ritter's hand found his rifle automatically, years of military training overriding his shock. But even as his fingers closed around the weapon, he knew how absurd the gesture was. What was a rifle against something that size? Against something that shouldn't exist at all? The creature finished browsing the tree branch and lowered its head to the water, drinking or perhaps just returning to its preferred depth. The neck descended smoothly, the head submerged, and within seconds the only evidence of its existence was the ripples spreading across the river and the torn branch still swaying where the creature had fed. Then, with a final massive disturbance that suggested a body turning beneath the surface, it was gone, vanished into the dark water as if it had never existed, as if Ritter and the 6 other men in those canoes had shared a fever dream induced by malaria and heat. Except they'd all seen it. All 7 witnesses would later give sworn testimony describing the same impossible thing. A creature from the Mesozoic Era, alive and feeding in a remote river in the Belgian Congo. A sauropod dinosaur, 65 million years after such animals were supposed to have gone extinct. The locals had a name for it, Mokele-mbembe, the one who stops the flow of rivers. They'd been telling explorers about it for decades. Europeans had dismissed the stories as superstition, misidentification of elephants or crocodiles, the fantasies of primitive people who didn't understand the natural world. But Herman Ritter, looking at that torn branch still dripping with river water, knew with absolute certainty that the locals had been telling the truth. That science's understanding of extinction was incomplete. That in the unexplored swamps of the Congo Basin, where Europeans had penetrated less than 100 miles from the major rivers, where vast regions remained blank spaces on maps, something impossible survived. But to understand how a German military officer and naturalist came to witness a living dinosaur in 1913, we need to go back 9 months. Back to Berlin, where an ambitious expedition was being planned based on reports from ivory traders and indigenous testimony. Back to when Ritter believed dinosaurs were safely extinct and the only mysteries left in Africa were botanical and anthropological. Back to before he learned that extinction isn't always permanent, that some creatures found refuges so remote, so isolated, that time moved differently there, that the Congo's deepest swamps held secrets more profound than anyone imagined, and that some animals, through a combination of perfect adaptation and geographic isolation, simply refused to die out just because science declared them extinct. Lieutenant Herman Ritter was 34 years old in the summer of 1912, and he'd spent the previous 8 years studying the natural history of German East Africa as a military naturalist. He held a doctorate in biology from the University of Heidelberg and had published numerous papers on African megafauna, particularly elephants and rhinoceros. His career was built on methodical observation, careful documentation, and a strict adherence to scientific principles. He was not a man inclined toward sensationalism or speculation. When colleagues discussed cryptozoological reports, sea serpents, living pterosaurs, mystery apes, Ritter dismissed such talk as the misidentifications of untrained observers. Africa held enough genuine natural wonders without inventing imaginary ones. Then, in July 1912, a letter arrived at his office in Dar es Salaam from an unexpected source, Karl Hagenbeck, the famous animal dealer and zoo owner from Hamburg. Hagenbeck's letter was extraordinary. "Lieutenant Ritter, your papers on African wildlife have come to my attention. I am writing to invite your participation in an expedition I am organizing to the Belgian Congo, specifically to the Likouala swamp region. I have received consistent reports from multiple independent sources, ivory traders, missionary priests, Belgian colonial officers, describing a large unknown animal living in the remote swamps. The descriptions are remarkably consistent. A creature with a long neck, massive body, living primarily in deep water, herbivorous but extremely dangerous when encountered. The natives call it Mokele-mbembe. I have collected over 40 separate testimonies describing this animal. The descriptions match no known species. They do, however, match the reconstructed appearance of sauropod dinosaurs. I am aware how this sounds. But the consistency of reports, the specific details, and the credibility of some witnesses compel investigation. I am seeking a trained naturalist to lead the expedition. Your combination of military experience and scientific credentials makes you ideal. If you're interested, reply to this address in Hamburg." Ritter's first reaction was skepticism. Dinosaurs in the Congo, preposterous. Sauropods had been extinct for 65 million years. No population could survive undetected into the modern era. But Hagenbeck was a serious man, not prone to fantasy. His animal-dealing business required accurate species identification and reliable information. If he thought the reports warranted investigation, there might be something genuine, even if that something was merely a large unknown crocodilian or aquatic mammal being misidentified as a dinosaur. Ritter wrote back, expressing cautious interest but skepticism about the dinosaur hypothesis. Hagenbeck's reply included a package of documents, sworn statements from witnesses, sketches made by people who claim to have seen the creature, and most compelling, a letter from a Belgian colonial officer named Captain Jean-Baptiste Laurent. Laurent's 1909 letter described an encounter on the Likouala River. "We were transporting supplies upstream when our Lingala paddlers refused to continue, saying we were entering Mokele-mbembe's territory. I dismissed their concerns as superstition. That evening, something destroyed 2 of our canoes that had been pulled up on the riverbank. The damage was extraordinary. The canoes weren't broken, they were crushed, as if something of tremendous weight had stepped on them. We found tracks near the damaged canoes, 4-footed tracks, each impression nearly a meter across, showing 3 clawed toes. The tracks led from the river across our camp and back into the water. Whatever made them was massive, far larger than an elephant. The Lingala said Mokele-mbembe had warned us to leave. We departed the next morning." Laurent's letter included sketches of the tracks. They didn't match any known African animal. The 3-toed configuration suggested a reptile, but the size was impossible for any known crocodile. Ritter showed the documents to his superior officer, who granted him a 6-month leave to participate in the expedition. In his official request, Ritter carefully avoided mentioning dinosaurs, describing instead an investigation of reports regarding a possible unknown large aquatic species in the Congo Basin. The expedition was assembled in early 1913. Hagenbeck provided funding. Ritter recruited 3 German companions, Ernst Vollrath, a photographer whose documentation would be crucial for scientific credibility, Klaus Werner, a hunter with extensive African experience who would handle logistics and security, and Dr. Friedrich Stein, a geologist interested in the region's evolutionary isolation. They would be joined in the Congo by local guides and porters, including the man who would become essential to their success, a Lingala tracker named Okonkwo who'd reportedly seen Mokele-mbembe twice and survived both encounters. The expedition departed Hamburg in January 1913, sailing to the Belgian Congo. They arrived at Leopoldville, modern Kinshasa, in February, then traveled upriver by steamboat to the mission station at Balobo, the last significant European settlement before the true wilderness began. From Balobo, they would travel by canoe into the Likouala swamp region, a vast, barely explored area of flooded forest, oxbow lakes, and slow-moving rivers where the water was dark with tannins and the jungle canopy blocked out the sun. At Balobo, they met with Father Pierre Dubois, a French missionary who'd worked in the region for 15 years. When Ritter explained their expedition's purpose, the priest's reaction was immediate and troubled. "You're seeking Mokele-mbembe," Father Dubois said. "It wasn't a question. I've heard the stories from my Lingala converts for years. Most missionaries dismiss them as pagan supers. Titian, but I've seen things that make me less certain. 3 years ago, a hunting party from a village upstream killed a young Mokele-mbembe. They harpooned it in shallow water, thinking it was a large crocodile. When they realized what they'd actually killed, they were terrified. They butchered it quickly and buried the remains, afraid of angering the adults. But before they buried it, they brought me to see it, to prove it wasn't a crocodile." "And what did you see?" Ritter asked. "Something I couldn't identify," Father Dubois said carefully. "The body was perhaps 4 meters long, not including the neck, which was another 3 meters. 4 legs, thick like tree trunks. The head was reptilian, but not like any crocodile I'd seen. The skin was smooth, grey-brown, almost like an elephant's texture. I took measurements and made sketches, but I never reported it to my superiors because I knew it would sound mad. A creature like that shouldn't exist, but I saw it. I touched the body. It was real." "Do you still have your sketches?" Volrath asked. Father Dubois produced a worn journal. The sketches showed exactly what he described: a creature with a bulky body, 4 pillar-like legs, a long neck, and a small head. The proportions and anatomy matched sauropod dinosaur reconstructions perfectly. "The Lingala say adults grow much larger," the priest continued. "They say the creature I saw was merely a juvenile, that the full-grown ones are as large as houses, that they weigh more than 10 elephants, that they live in the deepest parts of the swamps where the water is dark and the jungle too thick for boats to pass. They say Mokele-mbembe is the lord of the rivers, that it tolerates no rivals, that it kills hippos that enter its territory and destroys canoes that come too close." "Have you seen an adult?" Ritter pressed. "No, but I've seen the destruction they leave. Trees pushed over, riverbanks collapsed, areas of swamp where nothing lives because Mokele-mbembe has claimed that territory. The Lingala fear it more than they fear leopards or crocodiles. Fear born from genuine danger, not superstition." Father Dubois gave them one more piece of advice. "If you find it, don't hunt it. Document it, yes. Photograph it if you can, but don't try to kill it or capture it. The Lingala believe Mokele-mbembe is sacred, a spirit of the ancient world. Whether or not that's true, it's definitely dangerous, and it's in its element in those swamps while you'll be vulnerable. Observe from a distance. Learn what you can, then leave it in peace." The expedition departed Balobo on March 15, 1913, paddling upstream in 4 large canoes. Their crew included 6 Lingala paddlers, 2 pygmy hunters who knew the forest, and Okonkwo, the tracker who'd agreed to guide them to Mokele-mbembe's territory. As they left the last European settlement behind and entered the true wilderness, Ritter felt the familiar excitement of exploration mixed with something else: uncertainty, possibility, the sense that they were entering a region where the rules might be different, where time had moved more slowly, where extinction might not have reached. He told himself he was being romantic, unscientific, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Father Dubois had been right about one thing: if Mokele-mbembe existed, they were entering its world, and in its world, it made the rules. The journey from Balobo into the Likouala swamp region took 3 weeks, traveling northwest through increasingly remote waterways. The first week passed through territory that, while wild, showed signs of human presence: fishing camps, occasional villages, areas where the jungle had been cleared for cultivation. But as they penetrated deeper, civilization fell away. The river narrowed. The jungle closed in. The water darkened to the color of strong tea, stained with tannins from rotting vegetation. The canopy overhead grew so thick that midday felt like dusk, sunlight filtering through in scattered shafts that illuminated clouds of insects. The sound changed too. In the outer regions, there'd been bird calls, monkey chatter, the normal cacophony of jungle life. But here, deeper in, the sounds were different, muted, as if the jungle was holding its breath, waiting. On the 9th day, they encountered the first concrete evidence that the reports might be accurate. The expedition had stopped for the midday rest at a sandbar where the river widened slightly. While the paddlers prepared food, Klaus Werner walked along the bar to scout ahead. His shout brought everyone running. Tracks pressed deep into the wet sand. 4-toed, Ritter counted carefully. Not 3 as Captain Laurent had described, but the configuration was similar. Each print was nearly a meter across, pressed so deep that water was seeping into the depressions. The tracks emerged from the jungle, crossed the sandbar in a straight line, and entered the water on the opposite side. Elephant, Volrath suggested, though. His tone indicated he didn't believe it. Ritter knelt beside the clearest print, examining it carefully. Wrong configuration. Elephants have 5 toes, though only some leave clear impressions. These show 4 distinct toes, each ending in what appears to be a blunt claw. The spacing suggests the legs were positioned directly under the body, bearing enormous weight vertically, not the splayed leg position of a crocodile. Dr. Stein was making measurements. Stride length approximately 4 meters. Whatever made these was tall enough to take very long steps, or it was moving fast. Based on the depth of impression and the substrate consistency, I'd estimate the creature weighed between 5 and 8 metric tons. That's heavier than an elephant, Werner said. And look at the direction. It walked straight into deep water. What elephant would do that? Okonkwo, their Lingala guide, had been standing back, studying the tracks with an expression Ritter couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but also something else. Respect, recognition. Mokele-mbembe, Okonkwo said simply. Young one, adult tracks bigger, this may be. He held his hand at shoulder height. This tall at shoulder, adult twice that. When were these made? Ritter asked. Okonkwo examined the tracks carefully, testing the sand's moisture. Yesterday, maybe night before, fresh. The creature is close. The expedition photographed the tracks from every angle, made plaster casts of the clearest impressions, and documented measurements. It was solid evidence of something large and unknown. But it wasn't definitive proof of a dinosaur, just proof of an unidentified large animal. They continued upriver. Over the following days, they found more evidence. Trees that had been pushed over, not cut or burned, but simply knocked down by something moving through the jungle with unstoppable force. Riverbanks that had collapsed under enormous weight. And on the 15th day, something that made Ritter's scientific skepticism begin to crumble. They discovered a wallow, a depression in the swamp approximately 20 meters across, filled with mud and water, surrounded by vegetation that had been completely stripped from trees up to a height of 5 meters. The area smelled of rotting plants and something else, a musky, reptilian odor that reminded Ritter of the crocodile house at the Berlin Zoo, but heavier, more pungent. It comes here to feed, Okonkwo explained. Eats the water plants, stays in the water, safe from sun. Only comes onto land to move between rivers. How often? Ritter asked. Follow the river, wallows every few kilometers. The creature patrols its territory, visiting each wallow. Always moves through water when possible. That night, camped a kilometer from the wallow, Ritter lay awake listening to the jungle sounds. And underneath the normal sounds, insects, frogs, night birds, he heard something else. A low rumbling that seemed to come from the water itself. Not quite a vocalization. More like very deep breathing or the sound of something massive moving through water. The next morning, when he asked the paddlers if they'd heard it, they confirmed they had. Mokele-mbembe, they said. It knows we are here. It is watching. On the 18th day, they found the destroyed village. The settlement had been built on a low rise above the river, home to perhaps 30 people based on the number of huts. But the village was abandoned. Recently, cook fires still contained ash. Personal belongings remained in the huts, and the destruction was extraordinary. Several huts had been completely flattened, crushed from above as if by enormous weight. A fishing canoe had been snapped in half, the two pieces lying 20 meters apart. And most disturbing, a defensive fence of sharpened stakes that had surrounded the village had been knocked down in a single straight line, as if something massive had simply walked through it without slowing. Father Dubois had given them a basic understanding of Lingala language. Ritter asked Okonkwo to check if there were any messages left behind, any indication of what happened. The guide found markings on a tree at the village edge. "Warning," Okonkwo translated. "They say they built too close to the creature's path. It came through the village at night. They say it made noise, loud calling before it came, warning them, but they didn't understand. The creature walked through village. It didn't try to hurt anyone, just walked through. But anything in its path was crushed. 3 people died. The rest left. They say the river belongs to Mokele-mbembe. Humans live here only by its permission." "When did this happen?" Stein asked. "Maybe 1 month, maybe less." They photographed the destruction, documented the damage patterns. The evidence was mounting. Something very large lived in this swamp. Something that moved through the jungle and water with ease. Something powerful enough to destroy a village simply by walking through it. Boo. Evidence wasn't the same as proof. Ritter needed to see it, needed photographs of the living animal, needed definitive documentation that would force science to acknowledge what the Lingala had known for generations. On March 31st, they reached what Okonkwo called the Deep Territory, a region where the river widened into a series of connected lagoons, where the water was so dark it looked black, where the jungle grew so thick that it formed a ceiling overhead. "Here," Okonkwo said, "this is where Mokele-mbembe lives, where the water is deep and the sun doesn't reach. We should not stay, should observe from the edge and leave." But Ritter insisted they camp here, set up a proper observation post, wait for the creature to appear. They were so close. The evidence was overwhelming. They just needed one clear sighting, one set of photographs that would be undeniable. Okonkwo reluctantly agreed, but insisted they make camp on the river's edge, not deep in the lagoon area. "If we go too far into its territory, it will come. And if it decides we are a threat, all the rifles in the world will not save us." They made camp that evening, setting up their observation post with a clear view of the main lagoon. Volrath prepared his photographic equipment. Werner checked the rifles. Stein set up documentation supplies, and Ritter waited, binoculars ready, knowing that everything they'd worked for could be decided in the next few days. As darkness fell and the jungle filled with night sounds, that deep rumbling came again. Louder now, much closer, not random, almost like a pattern, like communication. Like a warning. The first 3 days in the Deep Territory passed in tense observation. The team maintained constant watch on the lagoon, taking shifts, cameras ready, documenting everything. They saw plenty of wildlife, crocodiles, water birds, even a family of forest elephants that came to drink at dawn, but no Mokele-mbembe. On the 4th day, April 4th, something changed. The normal jungle sounds stopped. The birds went silent. The insects ceased their buzzing. Even the frogs along the riverbank went quiet. The silence was so complete it felt like pressure against the eardrums. "It's here," Okonkwo whispered. "When the jungle goes quiet like this, Mokele-mbembe is near. The other animals know to be silent, to be still, to not attract its attention." They watched the lagoon intently. The water was perfectly calm, smooth as glass, reflecting the jungle canopy. For 10 minutes, nothing moved. Then, perhaps 50 meters from their position, the water began to ripple, not from current or wind, from something rising beneath the surface. A shape emerged, dark gray, rounded, like a boulder surfacing, but it kept rising. Water streamed off it, and Ritter realized he was looking at a back, a massive back, wide as a boat, covered in thick hide that looked almost like an elephant's skin but smoother. "Camera," Volrath breathed, already reaching for his equipment. But his hands were shaking so badly he fumbled the lens cap. The back continued to rise until approximately 2 meters of the creature's body was visible above water. The size was staggering. Ritter estimated the visible portion alone was at least 6 meters long and 3 meters wide, and that was just the back. The body extended both forward and backward beneath the water's surface. The creature moved slowly through the lagoon, creating gentle waves. Its legs must have been touching bottom. The lagoon was perhaps 4 meters deep here, which meant the creature's legs alone were at least 4 meters long. Add the body depth, and they were looking at an animal easily 6 to 7 meters tall at the shoulder. "Is the camera ready?" Ritter whispered urgently. Volrath was setting up the tripod, hands still trembling. 30 seconds. I need steady mounting for the exposure time." But the creature was moving, gliding through the water with surprising grace for its enormous bulk. It was heading toward the far shore, toward a section where trees overhung the water. As it approached the shore, something else emerged from the surface. A neck rising from just forward of the back, a thick muscular column extending upward in a smooth curve. 2 meters, 3, 4. The neck kept rising, water pouring off it, until it reached a height of nearly 5 meters above the water's surface. At the top of that impossible neck was a head, small, almost delicate compared to the massive body. The head was perhaps the size of a large dog's, roughly rectangular, with a blunt snout. Even at this distance, Ritter could see the nostrils positioned on top of the snout, an adaptation for breathing while mostly submerged. "Mein Gott," Dr. Stein breathed. "It's real. It's actually real. That's a sauropod, a living sauropod dinosaur." The creature reached the overhanging trees and began to feed. Its head moved methodically, stripping leaves from branches, the neck bending and flexing with reptilian grace. The feeding behavior was calm, unhurried. This was an animal completely comfortable in its environment, at ease, not threatened by the human observers. Volrath had the camera ready. The shutter clicked, once, twice, 3 times. Each exposure took several seconds in the low jungle light, but they were getting images, proof, documentation that would change everything science thought it knew about extinction. For nearly 20 minutes they watched and photographed. The creature fed on the tree leaves, occasionally submerging its head to drink, moving through the shallows with surprising grace. At one point, it turned slightly, giving them a profile view. Ritter could see the body shape clearly now, massive torso, 4 pillar-like legs, the long neck, small head. Every detail matched sauropod anatomy. This wasn't a misidentified known animal. This was a dinosaur. Living, breathing, feeding in the Congo jungle in the year 1913. Then, without warning, the creature stopped feeding. Its head rose higher, neck straightening. The posture changed from relaxed to alert. It had sensed something. The head turned, and for the first time, the creature looked directly toward their observation post. Even at 50 meters distance, Ritter felt the weight of that gaze. The eyes were dark, positioned on the sides of the head like a reptile's, but there was something in that look. Not quite intelligence, but awareness, calculation, the recognition that something new had entered its territory. The creature's mouth opened, and it made a sound. Not a roar, not the deep rumbling they'd heard at night. This was different. A loud, resonant call that echoed across the lagoon and into the jungle. A sound like a very deep horn or the call of some massive water bird, amplified 100 times. "Warning," Okonkwo said quietly. "It is telling us to leave, to stay away. This is its territory." The creature called again, the sound reverberating through Ritter's chest. Then, deliberately, it moved toward them, not fast, not charging, just walking through the water with slow, powerful steps, closing the distance. "Should we retreat?" Werner asked, hand on his rifle. "No sudden movements," Ritter said, though his own heart was hammering. "It's not attacking, just asserting dominance. We need to show we're not a threat." The creature stopped approximately 30 meters from the shore where they'd made camp. At this distance, They could see every detail. The texture of its hide, thick, wrinkled, grey-brown with slightly lighter coloring on the underside. The eyes, small, dark, positioned to give good peripheral vision. The nostrils on top of the snout, allowing it to breathe while mostly submerged. The legs, visible now as dark shapes moving beneath the water, thick as tree trunks, positioned directly under the body to support its enormous weight. It was beautiful, terrible, impossible, and undeniably real. The creature regarded them for perhaps a full minute. Then, apparently satisfied they weren't an immediate threat, it turned away. The neck lowered, the head submerged, and the massive body sank beneath the surface. Within seconds, only ripples remained. The jungle sounds gradually returned. First a tentative bird call, then insects, then the normal cacophony of life. The team stood in stunned silence. Volrath was the first to speak. "Did we get it? Did the photographs capture it?" "We won't know until we develop them," Volrath said. "But yes, I believe we got clear images, multiple angles, good lighting. This is proof. This is going to revolutionize everything we know about paleontology, about extinction, about..." Okonkwo interrupted. "We need to leave. Now, the creature has warned us. If we stay, if we come back, it will not be so gentle next time. We have seen it. We have what we came for. We must go before it decides we are not welcome." Ritter wanted to argue, wanted to stay, observe more, document behavior, gather more data. But looking at the Lingala paddlers' faces, seeing their fear, he understood. They'd been tolerated so far, allowed to witness something extraordinary, but they were guests in Mokele-mbembe's domain, and guests who overstayed their welcome risked becoming threats. "We break camp tomorrow," Ritter decided. "We've documented the discovery. Now we need to get this evidence back to civilization, get the photographs developed, present our findings to the scientific community. This is the most important zoological discovery of the century. We can't risk losing it by pushing our luck." That night, sleeping in their tents with armed watches posted, Ritter lay awake thinking about what they'd witnessed. A creature from the Mesozoic Era, alive in 1913. It violated everything he'd been taught about extinction, about the finality of species loss, about the impossibility of large animals surviving undetected in the modern world. But he'd seen it, they'd all seen it, and barring some mass hallucination, which was impossible with multiple witnesses and photographs, they'd just proven that extinction wasn't always permanent, that in isolated corners of the world, in places humans rarely went, some creatures had found refuges where they could persist beyond their supposed end date. The Congo Basin was enormous, millions of square kilometers of swamp and jungle, most of it unexplored. Europeans had mapped the major rivers, but barely penetrated the deep interior. These swamps could easily hide a small population of large animals, and if they stayed in the water, moved at night, avoided contact with humans, they could remain unknown for centuries. The question now was, would science believe them? The expedition broke camp on the morning of April 5th, packing equipment and preparing for the journey back to civilization. They planned to retrace their route to Bolobo, develop the photographs there with Father Dubois' assistance, then continue to Leopoldville and eventually back to Europe with their evidence. But as they loaded the canoes, Okonkwo approached Ritter with grave concern. "The water is wrong," the guide said. "Too quiet, too still. Mokele-mbembe is near, closer than yesterday. I think it is watching to make sure we leave." "We are leaving," Ritter assured him. "Tell the paddlers we'll be on the river within the hour." But Klaus Werner had wandered upstream, scouting the river conditions for their departure. Now he came running back, his face pale. "Ritter, you need to see this." 50 meters upstream, Werner had found fresh tracks. The creature had left the water during the night, walked along the riverbank, circled their camp at a distance, and returned to the water. The tracks were enormous, larger than the ones they'd found on the sandbar. These were adult tracks, each impression nearly 1.5 meters across, pressed deep into the soft earth. "It was checking us," Werner said. "Investigating, making sure we weren't a threat." "Or marking territory," Stein suggested. warning us that this area is claimed. Dr. Stein was examining a tree near the tracks. The bark had been scraped, gouged by something with tremendous force. Fresh sap was still oozing from the wounds. Look at this. These marks are at least 4 meters off the ground, made by something rubbing against the tree, perhaps marking territory with scent, the way elephants do, but at a height that suggests the creature's shoulder is at least this high. Ritter was torn between scientific fascination and survival instinct. These fresh tracks, the territorial markings, they were additional evidence, but they also suggested the creature was becoming more interested in the expedition's presence, more invested in monitoring them. "We should photograph these tracks," Volrath said, already unpacking his camera. "Document the territorial behavior. It's important data." "It's also a warning," Okonkwo insisted. "The creature wants us gone. If we stay, if we push into its territory further, it will respond." But scientific curiosity won out. They spent the morning photographing and documenting the new evidence. The tracks, the tree marking, the precise measurements. Every detail that would help them prove to the skeptical scientific community that what they'd witnessed was real. That's when Ernst Volrath made the suggestion that would change everything. The lagoon where we saw it feeding, that's clearly a regular feeding ground. If we could get photographs of it feeding again, closer photographs showing more detail, it would be invaluable. The images we have are good, but closer shots would be definitive. "No," Okonkwo said immediately. "We have what we came for. We must leave." But Ritter was tempted. Volrath was right. Closer photographs would remove any possibility of misidentification, would show details of anatomy that would prove beyond doubt what they'd discovered. Just a few hours. They could return to the observation point, wait for the creature to come to feed, get better images, and then leave. Against Okonkwo's emphatic protests, against the paddler's growing fear, Ritter made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. "We wait until afternoon. One more observation session. Then we leave regardless of results." They returned to the observation point, set up cameras, waited. The jungle remained quiet. The water stayed still. Hours passed with no sign of the creature. Then, around 2 p.m., the water at the lagoon's center began to roil. Not the gentle disturbance they'd seen before. This was violent, turbulent. Something massive was moving beneath the surface at speed. The creature exploded from the water, not rising gracefully as it had before. This was aggressive. The head rose on its long neck, water streaming off, and the mouth opened wide. The sound it made was nothing like the resonant call from yesterday. This was a bellow, loud enough to hurt their ears, a sound of threat and fury. "It knows we came back," Okonkwo shouted over the creature's call. "LS, it warned us to leave. We didn't. Now it sees us as threat." The creature was moving toward shore, not slowly this time. It was coming fast, powerful legs driving it through the water, waves spreading from its massive bulk. The speed was shocking, something that large shouldn't be able to move so quickly. "Get the photographs," Ritter shouted to Volrath. This was it. Clear, close-range images of the creature in full aggressive display, proof that would be undeniable. But the creature wasn't stopping. It reached the shallows and kept coming. And for the first time, they saw it emerge fully from the water. The body was bigger than Ritter had imagined, 6 meters tall at the shoulder. The body length at least 12 meters, not including the neck and tail. Weight clearly in the range of 20 or 30 tons. 4 massive legs, each as thick as ancient oak trees. And that neck, rising up like a living tower, the head at the top fixed on them with what could only be rage. "Run!" Okonkwo screamed. The team ran, scrambling up the slight rise away from the shore, abandoning equipment, focused only on escape. Behind them, the creature reached land and bellowed again. The ground shook with each step of those massive feet. Ritter glanced back and saw something that would haunt him forever. The creature wasn't just chasing them, it was destroying their camp. The observation post was crushed beneath one massive foot. The supply canoe they'd pulled up on shore was stepped on, the sturdy wood splintering like kindling under tons of weight. The creature's tail, which Ritter now saw for the first time, long and thick like a muscular python, swept sideways, and demolished their tent. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was deliberate, calculated. The creature was systematically destroying their presence in its territory, sending a message that could not be clearer: you are not welcome here. One of the Lingala paddlers stumbled. Klaus Werner ran back, grabbed the man's arm, pulled him up. The creature's head swung toward the movement. The neck curved down, bringing that massive head within 3 meters of Werner's position. Werner did the only thing he could. He raised his rifle and fired directly at the creature's head. The shot was point blank. The bullet struck somewhere near the creature's eye. The head jerked back. Blood sprayed, dark, viscous blood that proved this was flesh and bone, not myth. But the wound seemed superficial. The creature bellowed again, a sound of pain and fury. It didn't flee. It stepped toward Werner, one massive foot rising. "WNER," Ritter screamed. The hunter dove aside as the foot came down, the impact shaking the ground. Werner rolled, came up running, and sprinted toward the tree line where the rest of the expedition had taken cover. The creature stopped at the edge of its destroyed campsite. It didn't pursue into the jungle. Instead, it stood there, massive and terrible, between them and their supplies, claiming its territory, making clear that anything left behind was forfeit. They watched from cover as the creature methodically destroyed everything they'd left. Cameras crushed, equipment scattered, even their documentation, Stein's carefully compiled notes, torn and trampled into the mud. Then, apparently satisfied, the creature turned and walked back to the water. It submerged slowly, deliberately, the neck lowering last. And as it disappeared beneath the dark surface, Ritter understood what they'd lost. The photographs. Volrath's camera had been in the camp. All the images they'd taken, the proof they'd risked everything to obtain, crushed beneath tons of prehistoric fury. They had nothing, no physical evidence, no photographs, just a story that no one would believe. And the terrible knowledge that they'd violated the territory of something that had every right to defend its home. That in their arrogance, in their certainty that human science and human needs justified intrusion into any space, they provoked a creature that had survived 65 million years by staying hidden, by avoiding contact, by defending its refuge with absolute determination. Okonkwo's voice was quiet but carried clearly in the shocked silence. "We leave now. We do not return. We tell no one exactly where this place is. We let Mokele-mbembe live in peace. We are lucky to be alive. That is enough." And looking at the destroyed campsite, at the massive tracks pressed deep in the mud, at the blood still staining the ground where Werner's bullet had struck, Ritter knew the guide was right. They'd found their dinosaur, and it had shown them, with terrifying clarity, that some discoveries come with a price humanity isn't ready to pay. The expedition's retreat from the Likouala region took 18 days. They traveled in silence, the Lingala paddlers relieved to be leaving Mokele-mbembe's territory, the German team wrestling with the knowledge of what they'd witnessed and what they'd lost. Werner's bullet had wounded the creature. They'd all seen the blood, but the injury appeared superficial, probably a graze near the eye rather than serious damage. Whether the creature survived or not, they'd never know. They'd violated its trust, and there would be no second chance. The lost photographs haunted Volrath. "We had it," he kept saying. "Clear images, multiple angles, proof that would have been undeniable, and I left the camera behind when we ran." Ritter didn't blame him. They'd all run. Survival had trumped documentation, but the loss was devastating nonetheless. They arrived at Balobo on April 24th, gaunt and exhausted. Father Dubois took one look at them and knew something catastrophic had happened. Over dinner that evening, Ritter told the full story. The sighting, the photographs, the territorial confrontation, the destroyed evidence. The priest listened without interrupting. When Ritter finished, Father Dubois said quietly, "So now you understand what I meant about leaving it in peace. Mokele-mbembe tolerates observers at a distance, but intrusion into its core territory, especially repeated intrusion after warning, provokes defense. You're lucky you all survived." "But we have no proof," Volrath said bitterly. "Nothing but our testimony. Who will believe us?" "The Lingala believe you," Father Dubois replied. "They've always known. But European science," he shook his head. "Without physical evidence, they'll dismiss it as misidentification, heat exhaustion, collective hallucination. They'll suggest you saw elephants crossing a river or forest buffalo or something explainable. They won't accept that a dinosaur survived into the modern era." "We have witness testimony," Dr. Stein argued. 7 trained observers, all describing the same animal. Surely that carries weight. "In a court of law, perhaps," Father Dubois said. "In science, without physical evidence, eyewitness testimony is considered unreliable. You need a specimen, a skeleton, photographs at minimum. A story, even from credible witnesses, isn't enough." He was right. Ritter knew it, but the knowledge made the loss no easier to bear. The expedition returned to Germany in June 1913. They filed reports with Hagenbeck, who accepted their account but acknowledged it would be impossible to prove. They wrote preliminary papers describing their observations, but every journal they submitted to rejected the work. "Insufficient evidence," the reviewers said. "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." One reviewer's comments were particularly harsh. The authors describe a creature matching sauropod dinosaur anatomy living in the Congo. Such animals have been extinct for 65 million years. The suggestion that a population survived undetected into the modern era violates everything we know about extinction, evolutionary pressures, and paleontological evidence. Without photographs, skeletal remains, or other physical proof, we must conclude the expedition encountered a known large animal, possibly forest elephants in water, and misidentified it due to poor visibility and expectation bias. Ritter's scientific reputation suffered. Some colleagues quietly believed him but couldn't say so publicly. Others dismissed him as a fantasist. His career never recovered. He published no more papers on African wildlife. The Congo expedition became the defining and career-ending event of his professional life. Ernst Vollrath spent the rest of his life trying to recreate the lost photographs. He returned to the Congo in 1925 with new equipment and funding from a private benefactor. He reached the Likouala region, but found it flooded. Seasonal variations had raised water levels by several meters. He saw no sign of Mokele-mbembe and returned empty-handed after 6 months. Klaus Werner never spoke publicly about the expedition again, but privately, to fellow hunters he trusted, he told the story. And he showed the rifle he'd fired at the creature, explaining that he'd kept it unfired since that day as a reminder of what lived in the deep Congo. Dr. Friedrich Stein became interested in the geological isolation of the Congo Basin, publishing several papers on how geographic barriers could preserve ancient species. He never explicitly mentioned Mokele-mbembe, but his work laid theoretical groundwork for understanding how relict populations might survive. Only Okonkwo seemed at peace with the outcome. When Father Dubois asked him years later if he regretted guiding the expedition, the tracker said, "They needed to see, needed to understand that some things live beyond what their books say is possible. Now they know. That is enough." Hermann Ritter died in 1931, just before his 50th birthday. His final journal entry, written 2 days before his death, read, "I saw it. We all saw it. History will judge whether we were fools or pioneers, but I know what I witnessed, and I know that in the deep swamps of the Congo, something magnificent lives on, a remnant of the age of giants. I only wish I could have proven it to the world." The Ritter expedition wasn't the first to report Mokele-mbembe, and it wouldn't be the last. Stories of the creature had circulated among European colonials since the 1770s. French missionaries, Belgian traders, German officers, all had heard the indigenous accounts. Most dismissed them, but some believed. In 1932, cryptozoologist Ivan Sanderson led an expedition to Cameroon, just north of the Congo. Local hunters described a creature they called Enyamala that matched Mokele-mbembe's description. Sanderson's team found massive tracks in riverbank mud, 3-toed prints, each over 1 meter across. They heard strange calls from deep swamps, but never saw the creature itself. In 1980, American engineer Herman Regustas mounted an expedition specifically to find Mokele-mbembe. His team interviewed dozens of Likouala villagers. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. Brownish-gray color, long neck, massive body, living in water, herbivorous but dangerous when threatened. Regustas claimed to have heard the creature's calls and found disturbed vegetation consistent with a large animal feeding, but obtained no definitive evidence. The most compelling modern account came in 1983 from Congolese biologist Marcelin Agnagna. Leading an expedition in the Likouala swamp, Agnagna reported seeing Mokele-mbembe for approximately 20 minutes at a distance of 250 meters. He described it as having a wide back, long neck, small head, and reddish-brown coloration. He attempted to film it, but his camera malfunctioned, an echo of Vollrath's lost photographs 70 years earlier. Agnagna's account was significant because he was a trained biologist with no reason to fabricate. He described the creature matter-of-factly. It was an animal, large, unknown, matching descriptions I'd heard from villagers. I observed it feeding on aquatic vegetation. When it noticed our presence, it submerged and didn't reappear. Skeptics pointed out the lack of photographic evidence. Believers noted that Agnagna, a scientist, risked his reputation by reporting what he'd seen. The debate continued with no resolution. Between 1985 and 2011, at least 15 expeditions searched for Mokele-mbembe. Most found nothing definitive. A few reported sonar contacts in deep water that showed large moving objects. Several recorded unusual vocalizations. None produced the proof that would satisfy mainstream science. The lack of physical evidence led most scientists to conclude Mokele-mbembe was either misidentified known animals or pure folklore. But cryptozoologists noted that the Congo Basin remains largely unexplored. Satellite imagery shows vast swamp regions with no roads, no settlements, no human presence. If a small population of large animals lived exclusively in deep water and avoided contact with humans, remaining undetected would be entirely possible. In 2006, a team of biologists conducting guerrilla surveys in the Republic of Congo found something unexpected. In a remote swamp region, they discovered vegetation damage consistent with very large herbivores. Trees stripped of leaves at heights up to 5 meters. Aquatic plants disturbed by something moving through water. And in riverbank mud, tracks. The tracks were photographed and analyzed by paleontologists. The conclusion was cautious. Tracks show three-toed configuration, weight distribution consistent with extremely heavy animal stride length, suggesting height at shoulder of approximately 4 to 5 meters. No known animal in the region matches these characteristics. The researchers didn't claim to have found Mokele-mbembe, but they acknowledged finding evidence of something unknown and large in exactly the region where reports had been concentrated for centuries. Modern understanding of isolated ecosystems supports the theoretical possibility of relict populations. The coelacanth, a fish thought extinct for 65 million years, was found alive in 1938. The mountain gorilla wasn't scientifically documented until 1902. The okapi, a large forest ungulate, remained unknown to science until 1901, despite being well known to local populations. If large animals could remain undiscovered until the 20th century in the same African regions where Mokele-mbembe is reported, the possibility of an unknown species isn't scientifically absurd. Unlikely, yes, but not impossible. Evolutionary biologist Dr. Roy Mackal, who led 2 Mokele-mbembe expeditions in the 1980s, argued that if sauropods survived, the Congo Basin would be the ideal refuge. The region is vast, largely aquatic, has abundant vegetation, and has remained relatively unchanged for millions of years. If a small population of semi-aquatic sauropods adapted to this environment, they could theoretically persist. The population would be small, perhaps a few hundred individuals across thousands of square kilometers of swamp. They'd be primarily aquatic, coming to land only to move between water bodies. Such a population could easily avoid detection. Skeptics counter that no fossils have been found. No bones, no remains, nothing physical. But fossil preservation in tropical swamps is notoriously poor. Organic material decays rapidly in hot, wet, acidic conditions. The absence of fossils doesn't prove absence of animals. The debate remains unresolved. But what's changed since Ritter's time is the scientific community's willingness to acknowledge that unknowns might exist. That indigenous knowledge deserves respect. That large animals can remain undiscovered in remote regions. The certainty that Mokele-mbembe couldn't exist has softened to acknowledgement that it probably doesn't exist, but possibly could. The Likouala swamp region is more remote today than in 1913. Political instability has made the area dangerous. Scientific expeditions are rare. The deep swamps remain unexplored, protected by distance, difficulty, and danger. If Mokele-mbembe exists, this isolation has probably saved it. The creature Ritter encountered demonstrated that it would defend its territory against intrusion. In our modern world, where satellite imagery maps everything and human presence extends into the remotest regions, only the most isolated refuges remain truly wild. The Congo Basin is one of the last. Millions of hectares of swamp and flooded forest, most never seen by outsiders. If something wanted to remain hidden there, it could. Herman Ritter's expedition proved one thing definitively. The indigenous knowledge of the Lingala people was accurate. They described the creature's appearance, behavior, and habitat with precision that Western observers later confirmed. Whether that creature was a surviving dinosaur or an unknown species of large reptile or mammal, the locals knew it was real. Modern cryptozoologists honor Ritter's work. His detailed notes, preserved in German archives, provide the baseline for all later research. His descriptions of the creature's anatomy match sauropod morphology perfectly. His account of territorial behavior aligns with what would be expected from a large herbivore defending limited resources. Whether science will ever confirm Mokele-mbembe's existence remains uncertain. The evidence is compelling but circumstantial. The witnesses are credible but lack proof. The habitat could support such animals but hasn't yielded remains. Perhaps that's how it should be. Perhaps some mysteries deserve to remain unsolved. Some territories should stay wild. Some creatures should be left in peace. Ritter's final journal entry expressed no regret for failing to capture or kill the creature, only regret that he couldn't prove what he'd seen. But in failing to prove it, he may have protected it, because proof would have meant expeditions, hunters, collectors, museums demanding specimens. The creature would have been pursued, captured, probably killed. Instead, it remains hidden, protected by skepticism and remoteness, free to live in its ancient refuge as it has for millions of years. And in the deep swamps of the Congo, where the water runs dark and the jungle grows so thick that sunlight never touches the ground, something moves, something massive, something impossible, something that reminds us that for all our science and certainty, the world still holds secrets. Mokele-mbembe, the one who stops the flow of rivers, the last echo of the age of giants. Still there, still hidden, still defending its territory against those who would disturb its peace. And that, perhaps, is the way it should remain.